So what I wanted to start with, and I have some iterations that I like to do. And Rivka, if you can pull up the PowerPoint, and folks, you can rest assured I'm not going to be engaged in death by PowerPoint. It's going to be organic conversation. I want to make sure we have some individualized conversations as well. And so for the purposes of our conversation, I'm very symbolic, and you can see that there's a mountain on the PowerPoint slide. And the reason why I put that there is because I feel emboldened today that we can all climb this mountain together, because we are facing some unprecedented challenges. And I'm really excited though, because we're all in the same foxhole together. And yes, we're zoomed out. One of the things I wanted to suggest to you is that try to diversify what you're doing at home. Don't give Zoom an exclusive, but I want to just take a moment to say something to you. And I think it's serendipitous that we're talking about Zoom, because we are talking about conflict today. And I want to give you a short, brief, truncated version of why I think Zoom is important for today's conversation. If you look at Eric Yuan, some of you don't know his story, some of you might know his story. Talk about overcoming conflicts. This man, who's the CEO, change initiator, playmaker of Zoom, had this vision many years ago. But think about this. I want to give you a foundation for this. He applied after working as an engineer in China. He heard a speech by William Henry Gates III. He was excited by it. He was invigorated by it. And he decided at the time he was doing programming as an engineer in China that he wanted to live his dream and come to the United States. He didn't know he was going to face the ultimate challenge. And let me say this to you, and that's why I think us being in this video sharing space of Zoom is so serendipitous. He applied for his visa 8 times, 8 times. And finally, on the 9th attempt, he was given his visa. Many of you know he worked for WebEx, which was later acquired by Cisco, did extraordinarily well there, became a member of the C-suite, wasn't really happy with the deliverables that Cisco was providing to their clients, and had his vision to start this company, which he did in 2011. Now, here's the thing. Let me just... Okay, great. All right, fantastic. So I think the last thing, what was the last thing that you heard about Eric Yuan's journey?
He
was unhappy at WebEx and however they were performing.
Okay, so he decided to catapult his journey, because when he was in college, he was dating his girlfriend, and he had to travel 10 hours by train to see her. And he always said to her, I hope that there'd be a time that I would be able to see you without making that long distance trip. So his girlfriend, who's now his wife, has as much to do with him starting his successful company than anyone else, which is a really compelling story. So I wanted to share that to you. So listen, I want to make sure the sound is good. We're good? Okay, all right. So here's what I'm thinking with COVID-19, and we realize that every one of us is overwhelmed. And I think about Dr. King when I think about this. He said, we are all caught up in an inescapable web of mutuality, tied by a single garment of destiny. What affects one directly affects us all indirectly. So we're really all stakeholders in this conversation. Footprint. Number one, think about it. If you were still at work and you were working from a traditional office, for those of you senior C-suite executives, that beautiful office that you've always aspired to achieve, for those of you that work kind of in a fishbowl like many offices have gone to, get a nice cubicle. Think about this from a conflict resolution standpoint. On your desk, you were limited usually, because of the limited real estate, to one photograph of a loved one. So whether that was your husband, your wife, your partner, your nieces, your nephews, your children, your dog, your cat, what I want you to think about, and part of my conversation with you today, is just changing the frame of your conflict resolution experience. Here's the thing. In your own command center, or you want to call it a man or woman cave, you can call it anything that you want to. I want you to think about, how do I reduce the conflict that I'm experiencing? So this is something that's in Rivka's lane, because she's a producer, an actress, and a director. I want you to put together a storyboard that you can look at whenever you're on Zoom, WebEx, Skype, Canvas, Blackboard, whatever you're on, put together a storyboard. Now, on this storyboard, positive images of individuals who bring you laughter and joy and bring you love. Don't put Uncle Jeb on there if he's been causing disruptions at the family reunion for the last 20 years. He doesn't go on the storyboard. Only the positive people. Now, here's the thing, because you're not in your office, your traditional office, COVID-19 has us in a restricted, confined space. Use that space to your advantage. Make sure your visual, and I know that you folks are absolutely exhausted by all these different meetings we're having, virtual meetings, but create a space that's good for you. Create that storyboard of positivity so that it changes your mindset. Now, the other thing you can do in terms of positivity around COVID-19, and this is something that my partner talked about. One of the things that you can do that I think could be helpful as well is, I want to make sure, can you still hear me? Okay, great.
Yes.
One of the things, because I'm getting all kind of crazy signals here, but as long as you can still hear me, I'm sure Rivka or Dan will let me know. What I think is important as well is this. You can do virtual tours now of our national parks. The national parks, such as the Grand Canyon and others, Big Ben, now have these amazing virtual tours that have really good quality so that you can virtually, if you will, travel around the country. You can also have other tours, if you will, of other positive things that could help you. Now, here's the other thing I want you to do. We have baby boomers, Gen X, Gen Y, millennials, Gen Z, all on this call. One of the things I want you to think about doing from a conflict resolution standpoint is you need to diversify your imagery of positivity. We've already talked about the storyboard. The other thing I want you to do, and I'm talking directly to my baby boomers now, okay? My baby boomers, I want you to think about what other generations are doing. I want you to make sure, let your creative and innovative juices come out. So you can create your own Pinterest page. You can upload pictures to Instagram. Make sure that there are positive things that you are surrounded by that changes the frame of the conflict that you're dealing with. And I think that's important. So here's the thing. I want you to think, and again, I want you to think about, sorry, I'm talking about Zoom because I have a vested interest. I'm not a shareholder in Zoom at all. One thing I try to do so that I don't become overwhelmed by the conflict is I diversify my offerings. So I may use Microsoft Teams, I use Google Meets, I use Zoom.
Arthur, the audio is gargling a bit again. I wonder if it might help to turn the video off and we might get cleaner audio.
Okay.
It sounds like it might be.
Okay, is that better?
That is better.
Okay, all right. Well, fantastic. All right, so we're going to turn the video off. So here's the thing. Now, let's go to the next slide if we can. Okay. All right, so I wanted to get to some of these authorisms that have helped me over the years. And I'm going to share with you my perspective on this that I think can be helpful to you. One is IPOH, intense period of heat. Albert Einstein said, in the middle of difficulty lies opportunity. So that's number one. Number two, the second one is Strauss, which is one of my favorites. A situation that requires a solution. I don't use the P word. I haven't used it in over 30 years. And I think it's forward thinking. And I think that we should try, all of us, and this is where the prefrontal cortex comes in. I'm going to talk a little bit about neuroscience, where a situation that requires a solution requires movement. So I'm going to ask you to think about purge, sanitize, obliterate, annihilate, eviscerate, and strass. As long as when you use it, you give appropriate attribution, that's really, really cool. The other authorism I want to share with you is, as you're thinking about this time that we're sheltering in place and we're sanitizing and we're practicing social distancing, we've got 1,440 minutes in every day. I want you to think about earmarking some of that time to think about your upside as a leader. And part of having a good upside is understanding your conflict quotient. How do I reduce the amount of conflict that I'm experiencing? Let me give you some statistics that might help. The average leader deals with conflict 25% of their day. That's number one. Number two, the average organization, 10% of the employees consumes 90% of the conflict. Okay? Number three, most conflict, even when it arises at work, and now our workplaces are our homes, so we can still have that 10%, 90% rule going on. So the person that is passive aggressive, the person who is a pot stirrer, the person who is a professional derailer. Folks, what you need to think about, you've got to think about, how do I levitate, calibrate, and negotiate different terms of existence now that I'm in this, if you will, command center. But you control the command center. Here's the beautiful thing about that. Everything's a negotiation. So part of you creating, remember, the storyboard and the Pinterest page and your Instagram, and making your environment more holistic for you, is trying to understand, how do I negotiate better terms for my coexistence with my colleagues so I still have to interact with? And I always say this, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So make sure that you negotiate, and it's important. Let us never negotiate out of fear, okay? But let us always negotiate. That was John F. Kennedy. So that's important. The other and last, if you will, example of an authorism, CYA, cover your assets. Your assets are just important to you now than they were ever before. And your assets are your reputational capital, your integrity, your veracity. How do I make sure that I don't allow the professional derailers to get to me and destroy anything that I've worked so hard for? And here's the other thing, folks. There are serial conflict, if you will, creators. And those are the folks who actually, during a difficult period like this and adversity, they are the ones that want to increase the amount of conflict that we're experiencing. And you know what? There's a number of reasons for that. Number one, they're bored. Number two, they're very intentional. Number three, they're systematically, institutionally focused on making your life miserable. Some of you just did a visual. And what I want to say to you is this: you've got to starve the disruptors. And here's the thing, the playbook for disruptors, because all of us have been around them for a very, very long time, is very simple. They need sustenance and libations. The sustenance is that they continue to eat away at the very core of who you are, your very existence. And they will slowly masticize all the different organs in your body, from your liver to your pancreas. And here's the thing, we already know that 70% of our bodies is made up of water. So you know what they do in terms of libations? They're very strategic and tactical. All right, they're not going to make you hemorrhage at the same time. They're going to do a little scalpel, a little slice, and they will suck the water out of you bit by bit. And I know that's very graphic for me to describe it that way in terms of sustenance and libations, but that's how they actually survive, because we always react to them. And there's a good opportunity for us to decompress, diffuse, de-escalate, disarm, and deflect when those situations happen. And part of that is related to neuroscience, which I'm going to talk about. I wanted you to hear about the amygdala. And it's a very important part of our brain. And I will make sure that I spell that for you, because it's important for us to understand who it is and what it does. The amygdala is part of our midbrain, and what it does, it actually is a part of our brain that gives us threat assessment, freeze, fight, flight. It also gives us our emotions. It also creates a framework for us. So sometimes when we see fear, and there are three definitions of fear: do we fear everything and run, face everything and recover, or false evidence appearing real? So when those things happen to us, it's the amygdala, if you will, that creates this situation for us, fight or flight, and we respond. However, according to Daniel Goleman, who's one of the preeminent experts in emotional intelligence, you can actually be, if you will, amygdala hijacked. And what that means is that part of your brain gets hijacked quickly and you respond without thinking about what the repercussions could be. And what happens is that certain things occur. Number one, you can have goosebumps, you can have sweaty palms, you can have an increased heart rate. And a lot of that causes us to not be on top of our game. And that's when the prefrontal cortex comes in, because it acts as a balance to what the amygdala is saying to us from a neuroscience standpoint. So I encourage you to look further into this concept of the amygdala because it is fascinating to me. And as a lifelong learner, I'm now starting to incorporate my practice in conflict resolution. And we do a few things: organizational change, leadership, diversity, and inclusion. But in terms of the conflict narrative, this has been fascinating to me. And listen, I didn't know anything about the amygdala when I was a teenager, at high school and college, when I was a bouncer. Some of you know that story. I was pretty successful. Now, granted, Danny will tell you I'm 6'2", 290 on a light day. Charles Humphrey knows that, and sometimes my friends know that, Greg Ward. So I don't think that it was anything magical on my part, but I never had any physical altercations. And I'm wondering now in retrospect, is my prefrontal cortex helped me reduce the amount of anxiety and stressors that the amygdala might have triggered to me? And one of the things that I want you to think about as you think about this going forward is, how do I balance what my amygdala is telling me about emotions and reactions with making wise decisions through my prefrontal cortex? And part of that you might want to write down is called mindfulness. And mindfulness is critically important to this conversation as well, because it balances us. It creates a framework. And again, Daniel Goleman is one of the leading experts in that. So I want to just talk for just a minute or two. I want to ask you a couple of questions, and maybe we can get some responses in the chat box, and we can have Rivka read them. When you think of the word conflict, what words come to mind for you historically? Rivka, is there a way you can monitor what people put in the chat box?
I can. I'll keep an eye on that chat box.
Okay, great. So folks, what are some words that come to mind when you think of conflict?
Conflict, to avoid.
Yes, and I see my friend Greg Ward says anger and fighting. Yes, disagreement, Roy. Thank you. You're coming up. Excellent. So one thing those words have in common, at least from a perception and interpretation standpoint, is they're perceived to be negative words. One thing, and you can go through the alphabet. I mean, I can give you examples. The word A, angst. B, battle. C, calamity. D, destruction. E, evasive. F, fight. What I want you to think about going forward, ladies and gentlemen, sheroes and heroes, is I want you to think about some positive words that we can extract from the word conflict. So let's look at that. The C, collaboration. The O, opportunity. The N, nimble. The F, friendly. The L, illuminate. The I, intersectionality, clarity. All these positive words that can come out of this. It doesn't have to be negative, ladies and gentlemen. It doesn't have to be. It could be love. And obviously, all these things are very important. So I want to share with you a couple of things about some more neuroscience. There's an article that I read from Harvard, and I had the pleasure and the privilege 3 years ago of lecturing there twice. Once on mission and leadership, the other was bias. And there's an article that I encourage you to read by Diane Hamilton, where she talks about the notion of conflict and how we respond to it. And one of the things, she has kind of a 4-step process for understanding how conflict is connected to our brain and our thoughts. I'm just going to read these to you, which really supports part of what I've said thus far. Number one, she said, stay present. Okay? That's the mindfulness, if you will. Number two, let go of the story. So whatever's being said to you, think about it in a different context. And another Harvard professor that I know that Evelyn and I have used some of his multimedia is Bill Urey. He talks about dealing with difficult people. And one of the things that he talks about is when you have a difficult situation, you go to the balcony. Now, some of us, when we were kids, and Danny and I remember this, you know, we were taught to count to 10. Well, guess what, folks? All counting to 10 is not created equal. Some of you go 1, 5, 10. Some of you go 1, 10. So going to the balcony is a metaphor for when there's something that's coming in my direction that may cause my amygdala to be upset or hijacked. How do I make sure that I could, at least for a moment, practice mindfulness and respond in a way that doesn't, if you will, send incendiary devices back to the other person? And I think that's important for us to talk about. It's really, really important. So here's the other thing I wanted to do. And Rivka, if you can pull up the dollar bill illustration, and I'll talk about that in just a minute, because I know we've got about 10 more minutes before we finish, and I want to make sure I cover everything. So if we can pull up the dollar bill, I'm not sure if everybody can see it, but before we talk about that, one of the things that I want to talk about for just a minute is called relative conflict. And this is something I thought about that works for me. And I want you to think about this in the context of individuals that have come across your path, or members of your family, or anyone that you know that's had to overcome adversity and trials and tribulations. And I've been very, very humble and very graciously the benefactor of this. And that humbleness comes from looking at on a frequent basis. Just happens to be two individuals that I met in my journey. Once when I was a young law student at Howard University School of Law. And the other occasion was 7 years later in 1990 at Gracie Mansion in New York City. And I talk about two individuals that I think about frequently, and I think about the conflict relativity. And what that means is I think about what these two individuals endured during their lifetime. And then in retrospect, I think about what I have endured pales in comparison. And if these two individuals who were best in class leaders could survive and thrive despite what they were confronted with, then it really is a great outcome. And there's some teachable moments that can come out of that. The first individual I'm talking about is Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall. Think about the death threats, the institute of systemic discrimination, the fact that he was denied admission to University of Maryland Law School after attending Lincoln University, and all the different journey of hatred that he had to endure through his career. And the second individual spent 27 years of his life in a jail, and that was Nelson Mandela. And it's important for us to think about, when I met those individuals, it changed my entire complexion about conflict, because as I spent 30 minutes, and I was very fortunate to do that with Thurgood Marshall, Supreme Court Justice, it was just kind of a overwhelming experience for me, to the point where he could tell I was nervous, and he said, "Young man, relax," and kind of pounded me on the back. And I always remember how gracious he was, how making me feel comfortable, And after that, I said, how can I ever have a conflict in the world if this man, because of what he's gone through, can still be as upbeat and positive as he was? That was 1983. But of course, in 1980, a very unique reception for Nelson Mandela, and having a chance to shake this man's hand. And there were tears in my eyes because I'm thinking about all the conflicts that this man had endured. And again, thinking, whatever conflict I've ever had pales in comparison to what this man had in his lifetime. And think about in 1993 when he won the Nobel Peace Prize, which was really a real testament to his humility and his leadership. So I wanted to just mention that. So very quickly, if you folks have a dollar bill, you can pull it out. If you don't, you can look at it on the screen here. And this has a lot to do with my mindset as well. And you probably can't see it, but I'm wearing my button, which I wear all the time, which is an exact illustration of what I'm about to show you on the right side of the dollar bill in the back. You will see the American eagle. The American eagle is a predator. You will see in his hands two different and very important items. One is olive branch, and the other, there are 13 arrows. Now, we already know that the American eagle is a predator, so its very DNA is aggressive. However, as you look at this illustration, this eagle is not facing towards the arrows, which would really complement his or her DNA. It's actually facing the olive branch. And I think the perfect quotation related to this is Teddy Roosevelt, where he says, let us speak courteously, deal fairly, and keep ourselves armed and ready. And something else is really important about this as well. As I look at this lapel button that I wear all the time, folks always ask me about it, and I'm really happy to talk about it. But one of the other aspects of this that's important is when I was a teenager, I started reading excerpts, and it was too voluminous for me to read, for any teenager to read. But I started reading The Art of War. And the reason why that was important to me, because I just really respected Sun Tzu's perspective and optics and lens on warfare. And there's one quotation I'm going to share with you that I think really epitomizes his overall methodology. And he said, the smartest strategy in war is being able to achieve your objectives without having to fight. So it's all about strategy and tactics. And I think that's really, really important. Okay. So one of the things, Rivka, if you can go to the slide as we kind of wrap this up, and many of us that are in this space, that's exactly the slide I need. There are 5 conflict styles. I encourage everyone to look at these styles, figure out where you are. If you're really ambitious and you want to do a stretch assignment, I encourage you to take the Thomas Kilmann inventory, which will determine where you are in this configuration. I take the inventory often because not only because I'm a mediator and arbitrator and been in the conflict resolution space for many years, but I always want to understand where I am in the whole configuration of conflict. And I always come out, and this is just me, everybody won't come out this way, but I always come out as a compromiser and collaborator. And if you look into Thomas and Kilmann's qualitative and quantitative data and their data points, you will see that compromise and collaboration are probably the most strategic strategies to embrace. If you're competing all the time, of course, nobody's going to want to be around you. If you're accommodating all the time or avoiding all the time, your self-esteem gets impacted. Now, I will say this, there are absolute laser-focused times when we have to accommodate and we have to avoid. We have to make good decisions. So this particular slide is very variable, okay? You should use the style that fits the situation that you're in, but you'll probably have a default style that you'll fall back on, which is important, okay? So I want you to just remember that if you have the time and the energy and you really want to do a stretch assignment, you should look at that as well. So I want to go to, and then I have a gift for you, for everyone, that I created a few days ago. But I want to make sure that I've covered some of the topics that I wanted to talk about from the very beginning, telling you that you need to start careful of the pressure from derailers, recalibrate the use of language, don't use the P word anymore. And let me be candid with you. Apparently, my amygdala took control of me using the P word, which caused a lot of situations, obviously for me in my mid-20s, you know, because some of us are temperamental. But once I embraced the new strategy of Strauss, it took me 2 weeks to do it, by the way, 2 weeks. But once those 2 weeks were in my rearview mirror, and for those that know me and spend time with me, knows that I do not use the P word in any context. So everything for me is a situation that requires a solution, so it requires action. There's no suspended animation, which is important. Okay, so I want to go to the last slide, which is also very symbolic, which has what appears to be a martini glass, doesn't have to be. In fact, I'm going to suggest that it can be a number of different things. So it could be a vessel, it could be your vessel, it could be a funnel. And what I want to say to you, there are certain aspects now that are part of your vessel or your funnel or your glass that may not be good to you. And what you need to think about is strategically and tactically making decisions. What do I need to release that's in my funnel or in my vessel? What are the aspects of my journey and my sojourn that are not good to me? How do I make sure that there's not a traffic jam in my funnel or my vessel? How do I ensure that my bench are really holistic and authentic individuals who really want to be with me? And here's the thing, folks, it's also a point of this, that we need to think about, if we're not being progressive enough or proactive, we can be a self-inflicted wound. All right, there's a lot of folks right now that are doing more and more with themselves, and remove all those people and things and issues you don't longer need. All right, you don't need that anymore, especially now when you're working in a confined space. These are things that you need to streamline. And here's the thing, be kind to yourself and make sure that you have allies that can help you. And it's important for us to think about what Woodrow Wilson said. I not only use all the brains that I have, but all that I can borrow. So the point is, who's going to be in your vessel going forward? All right? Who's going to be in your funnel? You make sure that there are folks who are like-minded. They don't have to think the same as you. They can be diametrically opposed to you in their methodologies and their thinking. But the bottom line is, I love this illustration because it's in the spirit of diversity and inclusion. And I always say this, diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. So guess what? You've got a series of diverse players in your funnel, in your vessel, but they may not all be good to you. So if they're not really being good to you, release them, all right? What strategy are you going to implement to get it done? And I'm going to give you a charge as we finish up this webinar. As you think about your conflict leadership portfolio, your footprint going forward, will I be a change initiator to look at my vessel and look at my funnel to make differences to it? Will I be a change implementer for someone else who's in need? Remember, you be an ally to somebody. Okay, if you see something, say something. Will I be a change facilitator where I take on a stretch assignment and help someone out who doesn't have the institutional knowledge that may need my expertise? Am I a change recipient with all the conflict that's happening around me? Yes, you are, but now you have some strategies for recalibrating. And then, should I be a change resistor? And guess what? I've been involved with student government my whole life. College, law school, sometimes we gotta be change resistors, all right? It's important for us to think about that because sometimes you don't always have to go along to get along, and change resistors are good as long as you engage in respectful contrary. Civil disobedience is a good thing, right? Mahatma Gandhi taught us that. Dr. King taught us that. It's a good thing. And think about what Helen Keller said. I long to accomplish a great and noble task, but it is my chief duty to accomplish smaller tasks as if they were great and noble. So the last thing I want to leave you with is another acronym, another authorism about the word conflict. All right, and I'm going to say it a few times so that we understand how we process this new direction. So here's the word conflict. Okay, I'm going to break it down, all 8 letters. The C, coachable. The O, opportunity. The N, needing. The F, forward. The L, leadership. The I, intending. The C, creative. And the T, transformational. So let me say it like this so that it flows. Coachable opportunity, needing leadership, forward leadership, intending to create transformation. That's my definition of conflict. And it's important for us to think about that as we go forward. Coachable opportunity, needing forward leadership, intending creative transformation. That is my mantra. I created this 96 hours ago, and it's going to be my new playbook going forward. So it looks like we've got about 10 minutes left before the webinar schedule to conclude. I'm willing, if Dan and Rivka are, to stay over a couple of extra minutes if there are questions, but I'm hoping to entertain some questions.
Thank you so much. Yes, if everyone could put their questions in the chat box and I will funnel them through there.
Oh, nice, Rivka, funnel. That's good. Yeah. We were just talking about that. And folks, I saw your comments coming up. I was kind of laser focused on messaging. So with all my colleagues and friends who are putting things in the chat box, thank you so much. I validate you and I appreciate you. And for the new folks I haven't met before, I really appreciate you taking out time from your schedules to be with us tonight. So just to give you a context from the standpoint of video conferencing, Rivka's in New York City, Danny's on the left coast, and I'm in Middle Earth in Arkansas. How amazing is that? And we know we have folks from all over the country who are part of the webinar tonight. So again, thank you for being part of it. We really appreciate it.
We have someone here from Texas.
Yes, that's my new colleague from the Federal Mediation and Conciliation Service. Awesome.
Who did the study of the 5 conflict styles?
Yes, Danny, sure. It's Thomas and Kilman. They are considered to be the preeminent gold standard for conflict resolution. It's a great inventory. It's very user-friendly. No disrespect to the Myers-Briggs. The Myers-Briggs sometimes takes hours. My colleague Greg Ward knows that. It takes hours to process. But, you know, these are good instruments. A lot of folks can create a mechanism, if you will, for understanding these inventories, because guess what? We're going to have a playbook for getting better. We should try to challenge ourselves to find out how can we be better. Thomas and Kilman, right? 2 different individuals. Okay. And just again, I think I saw Amanda Vargas, my colleague. It's called Coachable Opportunity, Needing Forward Leadership, Intending Creative Transformation. That's my new definition for conflict.
From Jeffrey Yip, conflict is inevitable, but acknowledging and addressing it is a paradigm shift for many who are uncomfortable with conflict.
That's correct. Jeff, thanks for weighing in. Another colleague of mine from NYU, from Langone Medical Center. He has a little bit of an advantage. We've shared real estate together before. That's a great perspective. I think I saw a comment from Hank Kimmel, my buddy from Atlanta, Georgia. He's also a gifted mediator.
He's asked, how does the nature of conflict resolution become altered by virtual platforms, mediations, arbitrations done by Zoom?
Yes, well, here's the thing. You know, one of the things that we're taught, and Hank, thanks for that question. One of the things is really important to understand is that, you know, just because we're in a video conference environment doesn't mean the conflict ends. Mediation and arbitration It's been difficult for many of us who have tried to transition to that because, quite frankly, if you think about labor and employment mediators, and some of you know this, the majority of us have been doing this for a very long time. So now we're trying to pivot. And I had this conversation with my colleague last week from the American Arbitration Association, and I know my colleague Jackie Becker is on the website. Now it's kind of taking those transferable skills as neutrals and now creating an environment where we can still try to provide strong deliverables. It's difficult because guess what? There really is no playbook for this. But the question is, how do we make sure that the same level of due diligence, the same attention to detail, and creating the same space? Let me say this to you very candidly, and Rivka, you understand this in the work that you do. Implicit bias could still happen on a Zoom call. Unconscious bias can still happen on a Zoom call through a mediation or arbitration. So it's just a matter of us understanding that's the platform. Before, it used to be a conference room. Now the platform's a little different. It doesn't change what we have to do as neutrals to try to execute at the highest level. Okay, was there another question that came in?
Let's see, we're getting some great comments as well. More often than not, there's an unspoken energy under every conflict that needs to be brought to the table if the parties are trying to resolve their conflict. More often than not, that energy has everything to do with someone feeling as if they've been treated as if they don't matter. From Andrea Hirschman.
That's correct. And here's the thing I say about this. Years ago, we had a very strategic way of dealing with that kind of situation. I always think about this. It's important for us to remember the words of Eleanor Roosevelt, that no one can make you feel inferior without your consent. And guess what? If we feel powerless in a situation, that's why all of us tonight on this webinar, we need to be allies to folks who may not be able to speak up. Those are the folks who are suffering from SIS. They're suffering in silence because they're conflicted because somebody's being a bully, which is the next frontier, folks. And I'm sad to say that right now, we need to make sure that bullying legislation gets passed by the different state legislatures around the country. Now, we have it for K through 12, but it came a little late because a lot of our children are committing suicide. We need bullying statutes at the workplace, folks, because we still have folks that are bullying, and that's not good. That causes the ultimate conflict because you are the target.
Mandela consciousness, no one can steal your dignity. It's inside you. You're born being worthy, valuable, and vulnerable. Your dignity is your anchor. That's Mandela consciousness from
Absolutely.
Andrea Hirschman. I also saw a comment here from Cheryl Smickle. Phase 5 is considered the best tool for identifying personality. According to the big 5 factors, Myers-Briggs only focuses on 3. DISC might be 4.
Correct. Yeah, and I'm not promoting any particular tool, one or the other. One that I find to be particularly effective that doesn't necessarily directly adjudicate or resolve conflict is called the Engaging Leader by Dr. Ed Gubman. It's a useful tool when you're talking about leadership because it determines whether you're a driver or a builder. But once you understand which of those you are, it may actually change how you feel about your conflict trajectory going forward. And that's important to know. So these are all good tips that our viewers and our listeners, if you will, are talking about.
Let's see. Do we have any other questions? We have about 4 minutes left.
Okay.
Looks like I think we've
there was a
wrapped up in
comment
perfect
from
timing.
Awesome. I think there was a comment from Greg Ward, but I didn't see the entirety of it.
Let's see. The 4 quadrant assessments are losing traction to the 5-factor model. And a comment from Andrea, neuroscience now shows that emotional injuries show up in the same part of the brain as physical injuries.
That's correct. And I encourage everyone who has an interest in this space, and this is a good time to be a lifelong learner, folks, because, and here's the thing, I want you to moderate. Some of you are spending 4 or 5, 6 hours on Zoom calls, Zoom sessions. You know what, after every hour, get up and take a break. please, 10 or 15 minutes, walk outside, get your fresh air, do something differently. You need to also diversify your food group, folks, because we know, you know what, a lot of us are putting on pounds. Yours truly, I'm 290 on a light day. I've been saying that for years. You know what? So we need to also think about our most important vessel. Our most important funnel is ourselves. And if we don't take care of that, ruined from a conflict standpoint. That is an intrapersonal conflict. And guess what? We have a good way of changing it. And again, we can negotiate.
Thank you so much. We're getting just lots of thank yous in the comment section. And thank you all for joining us tonight.
I just want to thank Arthur and everybody for coming today. And Arthur, what an amazing presentation. I've been lucky enough to be in many of your classes over the years, from everything from mediation to arbitration. And you are certainly my guru in all those things, leadership. And I learn so much every time I take one of your classes. So thank you so
brother.
much for everything. And we also put together a panel on police brutality a couple of years ago after the Eric Garner situation in Staten Island. And I think that was really helpful on teaching people how to moderate conflict. And,
yes, and Charles Humphrey was part of that. He was on the call tonight.
oh, that's
The
right. Thank
ATF.
you, Charles.
That's right.
Thank you. And by the way, just as a footnote, Rivka has been teaching, using drama to teach mediation, conflict resolution to police officers and community members in New York City.
Correct.
And so it's a way of using the arts and role playing. So thank you, Rivka, for that. But every time you speak, Arthur, you're just so inspiring, and we love you. And I can't wait till you write your book so we can help promote it on our website, flowbellangels.org. So everybody, please support Arthur and Evelyn in everything they do. They are masters at this craft and just so inspiring. And one more plug for our foundation. Our new focus this year is on voting by mail because of the COVID-19 and all the dangers it creates by personal voting, as what happened in Wisconsin. So we are very focused on supporting the voting by mail policy, and we hope you all do as well. And if anybody's interested in joining in that project, please email me at dan@flowbell.org or rivka@flowbell.org. And if anybody wants to send any comments to Arthur, the email for Arthur is, Rivka, could you give that again? It's diversityofficers@aol.com, correct?
Actually, Dan, it's diversity officer singular at AOL.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
It's
Let's put it on this so everybody can see it, okay? If you want to
Yes.
email, if anybody doesn't have Arthur, it's diversity officer singular and
at AOL.com, correct.
at AOL.com. Okay.
Yes, diversity officer at AOL.com. And also, the good news, folks, we just rebranded our website with the help of a number of people, but most recently, good friend Jen Cozens has been a collaborator on that. So Jen, I want to thank you publicly for your help and support. We're now conscioustrainers.com. We're still a work in progress, but thank you so much for your support.